Welcome, everyone, to another special episode here on NotInHallOfFame.com of The Buck Stops Here. And hopefully you may have checked out something that we did recently where we had Ken Crippen and Bill Carroll, football historians, and I put them to the task. I said, I'm going to give you a pairing of a couple football players, and you would have to vote for one of them to be a member of the United States Athletic Hall of Fame. And if you don't know what that is, I'm going to tell you. The United States Athletic Hall of Fame is something that I co-created with my partner, Evan Nolan, because we realized nobody did it. So we made one. And you can go after this, you can check out www.notinhalloffame.com/USA, and you can vote for who you want to be as part of the United States Athletic Hall of Fame, first ever class. The first 25 people will get in. And the great thing here, it's all democratic. There's 130 athletes. There's also a coach and contributor section too, but we're focusing on the athletes today. And there are 23 players, actually technically 26, representing baseball. So I had Ken and Bill look at the 18 names that were in football. And with me today is someone who I just posted an interview of, Cooperstown Dave Metter. How you doing?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
And thanks for coming back. And you have brought with you Jordan or Justin? I keep getting this wrong. Julian. Oh my God. Okay, I got the J part right. My bad. I'm horrible with names. Julian Schultz. Thank you so much for joining us, and I'm sorry about getting names wrong.
It's not a problem.
You got to put your first name in your Twitter handle. That makes it easier.
And before we actually go into what we're doing, let's just give everyone's Twitter handle where you can follow my two guests.
Sure. I'm Cooperstown Dave. Pretty easy.
And I'm at Birds on the Bat.
There you go. All right, so give them a follow, and because I just did the same thing for my new friend Julian, and so we're gonna get right into it. So here are the rules. There are 23 names, and I've paired them up. Obviously, division tells you that I had to make a group of 3, and you could vote for every one of these people, but for just for fun, I'm going to throw 2 names, and then I'm just going to rear back and let these 2 gentlemen decide if they could only put one of them in the United States Athletic Hall of Fame, who would it be? Are you guys ready?
As ready as I'm going to be. This is some brutal big names you're throwing at us, but we're going to do our best.
Yeah. Which is the whole point of the process, right? Okay, so your choice is between Babe Ruth and Josh Gibson. Who do you pick?
Come on. Yeah, I'm going to say that for almost every time. I'll lead off here. Just to throw some background. I mean, if you need a background on Babe Ruth, I mean, I don't know if you should be voting, but go for it anyway. Maybe you're just not a baseball person, but I mean, Babe Ruth is the most iconic figure in baseball history. Of course, if I say something, Julian, that you disagree with, I'm expecting, and I know you enough that you're not going to be shy and hold back. But Ruth, through a lot of history, held the home run record. He, when you look at his accolades, there isn't a lot, but that's only because he preceded the period of many of the accolades. But he has a 206 OPS plus, which means he was more than 100% better than the average player. He's first in Jaws, which I think has been discussed on this podcast in the past. But Ruth he's Babe Ruth. Josh Gibson was considered the Babe Ruth of the Negro Leagues. The Negro Leagues players said, well, no, Ruth is the Josh Gibson of the AL. Gibson really is considered, and rightfully so, the greatest hitter in Negro League history. He didn't necessarily have the level of cultural impact, maybe in fame, as Satchel Paige when it comes to Negro Leaguers because of various reasons, which maybe we'll discuss when we talk about Paige. But all told, I think I got to go Ruth because it's hard for me to pick many people that we're going to discuss that I'd probably put over Ruth, because part of my understanding of this Hall of Fame is also considering the cultural impact. I'm going to skew more towards the numbers, but if I'm factoring in cultural impact in any meaningful way, Babe Ruth is one of the first biggest pop culture icons in America, regardless of sport, let alone sport. And through reasons that are certainly not Josh Gibson's fault, he didn't have that impact. I got to go with Babe Ruth.
Yeah, I mean, to build off of what Dave said, I'm sure that we'll disagree at some point during this podcast, but this is to no fault of Josh Gibson's. He kind of got the short end of the stick here. But anyone who goes against Babe Ruth is probably going to take the loss. Babe Ruth is just a transcendent figure in the history of sports and in baseball history. He's the all-time WAR leader, if you like that stat. I mean, he led the league in home runs 12 times, won 7 championships. He ushered in a new era of baseball in the live ball era with the home run. In 1920, he hit 54 homers. The Yankees led that year with 115 as a team. Second place was the Browns with 50. So single-handedly, Babe Ruth in 1920 out-homered every other team in baseball. To put that in perspective, the Atlanta Braves this year hit 307 home runs, tying the record for a single team in a season. So a player would, in theory, to accomplish the equivalent feat today, have to hit over 307 home runs in a season. Of course, that's a lot taller a task than hitting 54, but it puts in perspective just how different Ruth was given his era. And, this is an unfortunate reality for Gibson because, I mean, he's been called the Babe Ruth of the Negro Leagues, as Dave mentioned. And it's not to comment that he was necessarily any worse or lesser player than the Babe, but a lot of his production is kind of shrouded in mystery. There's mythicism around him. Did he hit 800 home runs or something? However, the data that we have indicates it was probably a lot less. Unfortunately, also a lot of the Negro League games at the time period were barnstorming games, which weren't official league games. So the statistics are lost in time and don't really count or aren't frequently counted. So unfortunately, it's kind of hard to evaluate Gibson. But even that being said, he should be and is often recognized as one of the greatest players in baseball history. But again, it's Babe Ruth.
Yeah, just to put a button on it, just to throw a little bit more credit to Gibson. For one thing, though there's differing reports on the quality of his defense, he was defending out of the catcher position as opposed to Ruth in right field, which is certainly an advantage. And yes, the number of career home runs when it's been further vetted is a bit shorter than I think on his Hall of Fame plaque at one point said nearly 800 or something like that. But and also Gibson sadly passed away. He probably had more baseball in him. He was in his maybe mid to late 30s, but it was also one of those situations where what often befell a lot of the black ball players was, as a result of inequities, a lack of as quality health care than the white players would have had. So really disadvantaged in a number of ways. All told, though, yeah, I guess we're both going with the Babe.
Okay. Just one thing I'll sort of address that you mentioned, Dave. In terms of whether the votes, you want to look at cultural impact, it's up to the voter. That's sort of like the beautiful thing about this process. Some people will be looking at cultural impact. I'm sure some people might look at those who had more of a social justice impact. Some may not care and just go purely numbers, and some might just say, who's my favorite? And there's no wrong answer to any of this. I think that all the people who were nominated in this first year will eventually get in. There's a few I'm pretty sure, based on what I've seen already so far, that I consider locks, but 25 spots, anything can happen. Okay, so let's move on to the next one. So I've got Ty Cobb versus Rogers Hornsby. Speaking of like two people who may not necessarily have been the greatest people on the planet.
So I know that Julian probably is the SME here on Hornsby. So how about you take this?
Yeah, okay. So I'll take this one. Full disclosure, I'm a diehard St. Louis Cardinals fan, so inherently I do have a bias towards Hornsby, just given the fact that he was the team's first superstar, led them and managed them to their first championship in 1926. Is hands down one of the greatest players in franchise history and greatest players in Major League history. I have him 10th on my own personal rankings all time. However, that being said, I do think Ty Cobb was the greater player. We're talking, first off, to put it in perspective, these two are numbers 1 and 2 in Major League Baseball history in batting average among, I believe, qualified players. Actually, that may have changed given the Negro Leagues becoming officially recognized as major leagues. I can't remember specifically, but at least AL, NL history, they are 1 and 2 career batting average. Cobb at 366, Hornsby at 358. Hornsby did have considerably more power than Ty Cobb, hitting over 40 homers twice. However, what he did and how he kind of transcends baseball history pales in comparison to Cobb. Cobb was the all-time hit leader, 4,189 or 91, depending on the source, until Rose broke it in, I believe, 85. Hornsby, meanwhile, got 2,900 hits before transitioning mostly to managing. Cobb's, rough and dirty style, stealing almost 900 bases, setting the major league record, and it seems like every category runs. I mean, not. I think he may have had doubles. Speaker passed him though. Nonetheless, he was the all-time leader in a slew of metrics by the time he retired. Hornsby never really was the all-time leader in much of anything. So I think that Ty Cobb and his kind of impact on baseball history is greater than Hornsby's. His WAR is higher as well. Again, if you like that stat. Now moving though to the quality of the man, this is a little bit of a tough one. You touched on this, Kirk, that neither one, it was a particularly pleasant human being by all accounts. Both of them were regarded as fairly prickly and unpleasant to be around, very much self-absorbed into their own craft. With Ty Cobb, you have reports of him cleating other baseball players as he's sliding around the base paths. And there's also, of course, an undeniable reality that we have to recognize that both have been linked to being, racist to a certain degree in the past, which, the level to which that's accurate is up for debate somewhat. There's been some contentious takes, especially regarding Cobb in recent years, and how much of his, unpleasant history has been kind of subject to warping over time. But nonetheless, it's pretty well accepted neither were particularly pleasant human beings. That being said, before I just kick it off over to you, Dave, yeah, I've got to go Cobb. He was just a bit better, and he was certainly more culturally significant. The average baseball fan today probably has heard of Ty Cobb. A lot of them probably have not heard of Hornsby.
Yeah, I'm with Julian on this. I'm going to go with Ty Cobb. As a baseball dork of a person as I am, I have an affection for the underrated, whether it's, as when I was on your podcast last time, and this, Julian, is me shoehorning in the name Charlie Bennett, people who are really overlooked. Hornsby, as Julian explained, is very much recognized as one of the very greatest ball players ever, but he's definitely underrated. But I got to go Cobb. Just a couple things to note on Cobb. For one thing, I think a lot of people think of him between his actual play and his era as a guy who probably got a lot of singles. His OPS plus for his career is 168, which might be higher than some people think or would realize. And also to give a further context to his level of fame and greatness, not only was he a member of the first National Baseball Hall of Fame class, but he got the most votes. That means he got more votes than Babe Ruth. So that really tells you where he stood, especially at that point, in terms of just the eyes of people and his greatness and importance. So I'm going with Cobb.
Okay. All right. So I tried to pair up a lot of these the best I could. Some you just can't. So I'm just going to do one that they're not really that similar, but again, I had a pair in some capacity. So we're going to go with next Pete Rose versus Ricky Henderson.
That's really interesting. I guess I could see why. Both there's some egos, if you want to say. I mean, Ricky famously always talking in third person, but I already know where I'm going to go on this. But just a little background: Pete Rose, in broad strokes, he's the hit king. He has the most hits. He broke Cobb's record. Really, famously nicknamed Charlie Hustle. He was a key piece to a few World Series teams across 2 franchises. He held a certain affection in my family. He was my dad's favorite ball player growing up. I have a picture to my left of him with my two sisters. My sisters were little kids at the times. They just look frazzled and scared. There's all these people. My dad's got a big dumb smile because that was like the hero. But Pete Rose famously banned from baseball for gambling. He's had other extremely serious and disturbing allegations that you could find. I don't know if I really want to repeat, but they're very credible and disturbing. And he's also somebody who, over the many years, has not exactly seemed to have learned much in terms of lessons and rehabilitating his character. And again, how much you want to consider that in these types of things is up to the voter. Ricky is Ricky, a real kind of legendary character, especially for somebody so relatively recent in terms of, I feel like he has a certain element, much like Nolan Ryan, who we're going to discuss, where it's almost like there's these tall tales or just a mythical nature. Ricky has the stolen base record. People are very excited about Ronald Acuna Jr. stealing 70 some bases this year. For context, Ricky averaged 80 stolen bases a year over 12 years. The archetypical leadoff guy. Neither of these players were necessarily a big plus on defense. Ricky has 3,000 hits. Of course, Pete has more. I've just mull it over my head. And if for nothing else, because for one thing on character to some extent, and then I think Ricky was the better player very clearly. So I'm going with Ricky Henderson.
So I am going to also go with Ricky, but before I say that, I have them a bit closer all time. I do have Ricky ahead, although it's fairly narrow. I think that, if we're talking about this discussion where we're kind of balancing how good was the player and cultural impact and quality of the man, which I'm not sure who I am to judge that or anyone, but we're doing our best as far as its criteria, right? I think Ricky clearly at least seems to win out on the third one, quality of the man. And I don't need to go into it any more than Dave went into it, but there's some pretty serious allegations against Rose. And then that coupled with the fact that he's been banned from baseball for over 30 years it's enough to show that, okay, that Ricky wins out there. Quality of the player, I do have Ricky narrowly ahead. He's the all-time stolen base leader. Like Dave said, Acuna stole 73 this year. Ricky stole 1,406 in his career. To tie that, Acuna would have to do that for over 19 years. It's just an absurd record. Ricky is also the all-time runs leader, 3,000 hit club. Won championship in 1989 with the Athletics. Pete Rose won 2 championships with the Big Red Machine. And, all-time hit leader, 4,256, which was one of the most, famous kind of chases in baseball history in the mid-'80s there. So the thing is, I do feel like Pete Rose is a bit more of an iconic figure, and especially probably more a slightly recognized name in the thralls of American team sports. And that might be in part because he was such a big name who got banned from his sport and has persisted to be banned since. But nonetheless, I do think that he's probably a little bit more famous and culturally significant for that reason. But I think that the total resume, considering all these factors of Rose versus a total resume of Ricky, I would have to go Ricky as well.
Okay. Actually, incidentally, Pete Rose was one of the first people I got to interview for this site. So
that's actually really cool.
Yeah, it was. It was interesting. Obviously, we didn't talk about some of the other things, but he did mention that, and it's sort of painted my vision of Kurt Schilling too, who kind of got in the news for something stupid recently himself. But and he said, like, if I wasn't banned from the Baseball Hall of Fame, I wouldn't be as famous as I am right now. And he's repeated that in other interviews too. So it's not like I did anything groundbreaking, but it was something that sort of stuck with me. And I always thought when Kurt Schilling I think it was Jay Jaffe. I could be mistaken on that. Said, okay, well, I'm not going to vote for him because I don't want to help him. It might not have been Jay, but it could have been. Somebody did say that I'm not going to vote for him because I don't want to sort of increase his marketability. Actually, and I thought, well, if you want to actually decrease his marketability, put him in because it's a snub to a lot of people. But that's neither here nor there. I just felt like getting that out. Knowing that you're a Cardinals fan, we're going to get it because we have two more big Cardinals to go. Let's get one of them out now. And this one I'm really excited about because I had a debate on this one with my partner on my Hall of Fame show. And that's Bob Gibson versus Sandy Koufax.
Go ahead.
This is a really, really difficult one.
Really? Okay, I'm just personally surprised. Go ahead, I'll shut up.
So this is a tough one because in my all-time rankings, Koufax does actually come out narrowly ahead. That being said, I mean, this is I'm not actually so strongly inclined either way. I think that these are almost the right-handed and left-handed mirror images of each other in a lot of way. They pitched in the same decade, at least dominated the same decade, the 1960s. Koufax more so the first half of the decade, Gibson the latter half. They each are iconic for extremely different reasons. Both had, enormous success in the postseason. Koufax winning 2 World Series MVPs and Gibson winning 2 World Series MVPs. They are 2 of the only 3 players still to have ever done that, the third being Reggie Jackson. So in a sense, they actually quite befit each other to be parallel or sat across the table from each other as we're doing. Gibson crushes Koufax in total amount of play, right? Games started, innings pitched, wins, career strikeouts. The volume is just heavily in his favor. WAR, I think his career WAR, including batting, which Gibson was actually quite a good hitter, is about 89. Koufax's is around 48. So a WAR head will go Gibson easily. On the flip side, Koufax won 3 Triple Crowns, 5 ERA titles, 3 Cy Youngs, and MVP. Gibson won 1 ERA title, albeit at a record 1.12, 2 Cy Youngs, 1 MVP. So I think that these are actually fairly well matched up with each other. And I'm not actually sure that one is any more iconic than the other. That might be my Cardinals bias showing somewhat, but at least my sense is, considering baseball fans, that they're both pretty mythical in a sense. I'm going to go Gibson just because I got to give a nod to my Cardinal guy and it's so close.
And you're allowed to, as Kirk said. So yeah, it's a good point about the era and sort of the era of the pitcher, which certainly helped both of them, not to put either down. And they both do hold different but similar maybe levels of legendary status in the game in different ways. Gibson, in a way, was, the first great ALNL black pitcher in a way that's probably more notable than is discussed. Koufax is an absolute legendary figure amongst Jewish Americans. Famously didn't pitch during Yom Kippur in the 65 World Series. Again, I'm trying, I look, a lot of us learn baseball from our fathers. These were 2 figures that were iconic to my dad, both as a Jewish man with Koufax. And then my dad broke his leg once. And I don't know, I think the personal anecdotes are a little interesting. Broke his leg once. He needed to get a driver. He looks in the newspaper, I'm going to hire a driver. Guy shows up in this jalopy, beaten up car that the driver clearly has been living in. My mom's just like, what's going on here, Ron? And he explains he picked him from the paper because his name was Bob Gibson. And so my dad then just there, moving forward, enjoyed just calling him Hoot because that was Bob Gibson's nickname. And that seemed to overcome all the deficiencies of Bob as a driver. But in any event, Koufax, much more peak heavy. Julian tends to be less peak centered than I am. However, Koufax's peak, while it's very high, it is very short. I think Julian did a really good job of giving an overview on these players. My vote, yeah, it's a bit of a tougher call maybe than some of these other ones we've done. I am going to go Gibson.
Wow. Okay.
Can I
Of
actually chime in one more thing?
course you can. Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, thanks, Dave. That very well said. And there's a book actually called October 1964 that if any of the readers have not had a chance to read or are not acquainted with, I'd recommend reading it. It's a really interesting book that kind of talks about specifically the 1964 World Series, which is between the St. Louis Cardinals and New York Yankees, and how it almost kind of encapsulated a crescendo about race relations in the country at the time. Of course, this was the civil rights movement, and in many ways, it pitted the predominantly white New York Yankees. I mean, they did have Elson Howard on the team, but it was a team that was led by Mickey Mantle, Roger Maris, Whitey Ford, iconic white players versus the Cardinals, which were a team that was led by Bob Gibson, Curt Flood, Lou Brock, Bill White, black players. So the book kind of discusses about how this World Series fit into the broader cultural kind of sphere at the time.
Cool.
Do you know who wrote that? Because I want to check that out.
Let me see.
Okay.
Yeah, and as he looks it up, I'll just add, I'm in the middle of reading a book that I was leaning on in my head a little bit, talking about Page, and Bob Feller's a name that I feel like could have made this list that we're not going to talk about, who really was a real American hero in a way that I probably didn't appreciate till I was reading this, given his military service and the sort of myth that was built around him as this young boy fireballer out of like the fields of middle America. But there's a book called Our Team by Luke Eplin that focuses on Satchel Paige, Larry Doby, Bob Feller, and Bill Veeck, and the coming together of those teams that Veeck put together, which were so fascinating. So now we're doing book recommendations.
And it's by David Halberstam.
Okay, yeah, I'm familiar with them. All right, so this one, another one that's not the best pairing, but again, I had to come up with a pairing. So we're going to go with Honus Wagner versus Lou Gehrig.
God, I have to start talking about these people, but that's really one where I'm tortured a bit. Honus Wagner is first all time in Jaws amongst shortstops. He's I feel like Honus Wagner has, for one thing, a certain level of cachet and recognizability because of that baseball card.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember as a kid knowing the card before having any idea about the quality of the player. But he has over 3,400 hits. He won 8 batting titles. He had his OPS plus is over 150 as a shortstop. He was also a baseball lifer in that he did a lot of, really, it's unfortunate because it's about how players in his time didn't make as much money, but did a lot of barnstorming. But also, to his credit, played a lot with minorities and playing against black teams and all the stories are very positive when I've read, and when it comes to his handling of that sort of stuff. Again, probably like underrated in a way for his play, in part maybe because the baseball card is such a big thing. And he wasn't a New York Yankee like Lou Gehrig, who won a couple MVPs as the Jaws leader amongst first basemen, is probably the best hitting first baseman of all time. It's in a way remarkable how famous Lou Gehrig is when you consider the fact that he was with Babe Ruth. I feel like there's a lot of cases in baseball history where there's an overwhelming figure on a team, and then whoever the other guy might be, no matter how great they are, they really get overshadowed. Yet Lou Gehrig is a very big name. Maybe I'm misjudging, and maybe his greatness on the field isn't as appreciated as I think. But famously held the consecutive games played record until Cal Ripken Jr. broke it. He had a nearly 180 OPS plus, gave one of the most famous speeches in American sports history. Man. I don't know what I'm going to do here. I'm thinking about my pick. I feel like I got to go Gehrig, but I also like defense, and I like the shortstop more than the first baseman in a vacuum.
Say it.
What was that?
Say it. Do it.
I think I got to go Lou Gehrig. I'm going Lou Gehrig.
Damn. I was hoping you'd go Wagner.
Yeah, same. But I can't. So
Fair
let's
enough.
hear from you.
So, yeah, I mean, again, you did a great job encapsulating it. Gehrig played really, at the turn of the century. Wagner played at the turn of the century, Gehrig a little later in the 20s and 30s. They're very comparable players in a sense. I do think that Gehrig was probably a bit better on a per game basis, but his career was shorter than Wagner's, so it kind of balances out in that sense. Wagner has one championship. You'll hear me reference the awards and the accolades a lot because I know some people are not particularly keen on those things, but I am. So Gehrig had I think 6 championships. And Wagner had 1. Nonetheless, yeah, it's kind of interesting because these two, as a kind of be talking about how Koufax and Gibson were a very appropriate pairing. These two are also a similarly appropriate pairing, and that the reason their name persists in the cultural zeitgeist seems to be for a reason that's very oddly enough divorced from their play on the field. Honus Wagner for the price of his insanely expensive T206 baseball card, and Lou Gehrig because he's become the namesake of a terrible disease, which he unfortunately passed away from, and I think it was 42. So in that sense, they're kind of like a very odd balance of cultural significance for very different reasons. I do think though that Gehrig was the superior player. I also think that, as Dave mentioned, for the fact that he's a Yankee, that gives almost like an inherent +1 bonus on cultural significance, just because the New York Yankees are the most, important and successful team in American sports history. Whether that's fair or not to someone like Wagner, I mean, maybe it's not, but it's reality. I think I would also go Gehrig, although this is also quite close, but I think that just his totality of body of work was surpassed Wagner's. And also, as we talk about the quality of the man in these debates, oftentimes, by all accounts, both of these two are absolute gentlemen. So.
Good. So what's my next one here? Well, two very they're all iconic figures. We're talking about the quality of the man. So here's a real good one, I think. Jackie Robinson versus Roberto Clemente.
I knew you were going to say that. And that sucks because in most other pairings, I would have picked whoever they're up against. Ruth would have been maybe the one where it becomes tricky. Clemente, 12 All-Star seasons and MVP. He's got exactly 3,000 hits, had a famous cannon of an arm out of right field. In a way, his stuff unrelated to his absolute play on the field, in a way, makes some people perhaps lose sight of what an excellent player he was. He wasn't exactly the sort of stodgy, immobile right fielder defensively. He had a bit more ability defensively, but he also, 4-time batting title, just an incredible player. All that said, though, he was a great man. There's an award named after him for Major League Baseball involving sportsmanship and community involvement. And he tragically passed away from a plane crash while delivering aid to the victims of an earthquake in Nicaragua. And he's a immense figure to Latino Americans, especially Puerto Ricans. And much like the other person I'm about to discuss, a lot of people wish to see his number retired across baseball. Jackie Robinson's is 42 is retired across baseball. When it comes to the total stats, his although Clemente, his career ended a little short, Jackie started a little late because of integration. Jackie Robinson integrated ALNL baseball. He was ultimately the perfect person to be able to do that and handle as well as anyone could the rigors and challenges that were involved in doing that. He had a 133 OPS plus. Sorry, I think I just barked.
No, that would be my other co-host, Jasper the Friendly Corgi. You can follow him at Jasper_the Friendly Corgi.
Great timing as I talk about Jackie Robinson of all people. Jackie Robinson, excuse me again. A 130. Sorry, it's funny. Uh, a great hitter for a second baseman while playing a very good second base. Again, some of his totals as it relates to stats are a bit short because of the nature of getting into the AL/NL later than he otherwise should have or would have. His impact is incalculable. Of course, somebody would have been the person that integrates baseball, but in a way, if it wasn't by Jackie and someone who handled it as well as he did, who knows how then it would have played out over time. In a way, just to mention, shout out to Larry Doby. I think it gets lost sometimes how some of the second, third, fourth black players it wasn't years later, it was weeks or months later. So those people faced very similar challenges. I think I'm gonna go Jackie Robinson. Because the integration of baseball, or the reintegration of baseball, we should really say, because of the whole history of the professional sport. It's a singular achievement and moment, so I'm voting for Jackie.
Yeah, I mean, my take on this, I'm almost just going to completely gloss over their quality as players. I do have Clemente as a superior player just because, I mean, again, I'm no fault of Jackie's, but his career was just much more fleshed out. Even with his untimely early passing, he just accomplished more. Jackie debuted at age 26 for the Monarchs, I believe, but then played 1 year there before debuting again at age 28, playing through age 37, 10 years for the Dodgers. It's just the breadth isn't quite there. But I was thinking about this as we were kind of talking about this format, and is there anyone that could possibly outduel Babe Ruth? And the only person who I could possibly consider doing so is Jackie Robinson. I genuinely still don't know who I would pick between those two. I mean, Jackie is really that culturally significant. I think a couple years ago, there was like a Jackie Robinson game-worn jersey that went up for auction. And there was this discussion. I mean, LeBron James came out and said something like he's the only player's jersey that he would want hanging in his house and any sport. Jackie Robinson's cultural impact and the importance he has had across sports is so immense, just so enormous. It doesn't even have to, the fact that he was a Hall of Fame level player doesn't even matter, frankly. I think that even if he were a pretty mediocre player, I might still pick him over Roberto Clemente. And that's to no fault of Clemente, who has the Roberto Clemente Award named after him, Dave. And as a subtle plug, Yadier Molina won it once. He's not as bad a guy as everyone thinks. Anyway, yeah, I think that like Jackie Robinson just wins almost by default in any matchup you put him in.
My 2 cents on that, just because usually I don't want to get into this one thing, but when I was having a discussion like offline with Bill Carroll, who did the football thing with us, and he was telling me more other things, and I was doing a lot more research. Baseball wasn't even Jackie's best sport, which is crazy to think of, because he was incredible.
Yeah, that's a good point, given the nature of this Hall of Fame is that multi-sport element.
Right. And so just a quick thing, there are there are 3 other baseball players who we're not going to be talking about, but did play pro baseball. Deion Sanders is a nominee. Bo Jackson is a nominee. I'll admit that was surprising to me when I put the committee together, and Bo got talking about iconic figures, and Jim Thorpe. So yeah, baseball certainly best represented, but some people might be looking at the wide breadth of everything. And like for me, Jackie, because of that, same with Jim Brown, who was just great at anything he did. But moving on, 2 old school pitchers here. Talk about an iconic name. I wonder how many people actually know there's actually a person behind it. Cy Young against Walter Johnson.
Julian, you want to kick it off?
Yeah. So in my personal rankings, I have Walter Johnson as the single greatest pitcher and second greatest player in baseball history. Played from 1907 to 1927, led the Washington Senators, now Minnesota Twins, to the 1924 World Series championship. Second all-time in wins with 417. First player to ever strike out 3,000 for his career. Struck out over 3,500. I think 3,534, but I don't quote me on the exact number. Career ERA hovering just above 2. I mean, you can go on and on about Walter Johnson and how he was. If you look at his baseball reference page, I mean, the whole damn thing is bold and italicized, basically. He was leading in everything every year. That being said, Cy Young is probably, I think I have him as the third greatest pitcher ever. Roger Clemens sandwiched between the two. Cy Young is the all-time wins leader, 511. He's also the all-time loss leader with over 300, but that's what happens when you pitch more than anyone else ever. But that's not to say that he wasn't a great pitcher. He absolutely was. He was incredible. Career ERA hovering in the mid-2s, I think like 2.63, 2,800 career strikeouts. Wasn't quite as dominant on a per-game basis as Walter Johnson, but he just pitched so goddamn much. I have to go Cy Young as a more culturally significant figure, definitely, just because of the award. There's no Walter Johnson award. I mean, if you say a pitcher named Johnson, most people aren't even going to think of him. They're going to think of Randy Johnson. He's probably the second guy with the last name Johnson that even comes to mind. And yeah, like you said, maybe some people don't even know Cy Young was a really like a real person, but he was. And I'm going to go Cy Young in large part, honestly, because the award carries his name and because he has persisted as a figure much more relevantly through time than Walter Johnson has, albeit the fact that Johnson was, frankly, a better player.
All right, we finally have one where I'm going to go the other way. I'm going to go with Walter Johnson. There's not that much more I can add in detail than what Julian did so well. I guess it was maybe said, but I forget. I mean, when he mentioned second, Johnson being second in wins, it's because he's second to Cy Young with 511, which is one of the most insurmountable records. Walter Johnson did make the first Hall of Fame class. Cy Young did not. However, that's probably more a product of the chaos of the system at the time, because Cy Young got a lot of votes in both the BBWA ballot and the Veterans Committee. And given when he had played, there was almost certainly confusion about what does he qualify for. So as you could tell, it's like I have to pull at straws to kind of really differentiate. But for me, yeah, look, his name's on the award, and that's very significant in a way. But I agree with Julian in terms of I would take Johnson ahead of Young as a player and for his pitching career. And that's really why I'm choosing him over Cy Young.
Okay. I often said there's a bunch of people under 30 who think that George Foreman is a cook, but anywho. No one's laughing at that one? Okay, I thought that
I got one.
Could be.
Okay. Alrighty. Here's what I found really interesting. Nolan Ryan versus Satchel Paige.
Ooh.
Oh gosh, that's a tough one.
So
you go first.
yeah, that is tough. I'm gonna have to with some of these, I'm just talking them out. Again, I've been reading that book that talks a lot about Paige, and they both had 8 all-star seasons, so there's they're equal there. Paige is like Josh Gibson is considered the greatest hitter in Negro League history. Paige is very clearly considered the best pitcher. Paige had a lot of opportunities to face white players, certainly not in league play, and he excelled. Paige, unfortunately, just given the timing of his age and when integration was to occur, although he ultimately got time in the American League, he was not Jackie. He wasn't the first or second or third or anything like that. He was a bit older and a pitcher. He doesn't seem to have been all that seriously considered as a result of his age to have been the person to break the color barrier. He had some resentments around that. But Satchel Paige has a certain, again, folklore about him. and pitched forever and well, and he had that colorful nature that you would see a lot in Negro League play, of like he would tell all of his defenders, sit down for this inning, as in, I'm going to strike out everybody. You don't have to do anything. All these things that between his actual quality of play and showmanship allowed him to get paid way better than like anyone else, certainly in the Negro Leagues. And he was making more money than a lot of major leaguers. Ryan is the famous fireballer who has the most strikeouts, but also the most walks. In a way, also has a bit of a folklore vibe, which is especially weird, again, because he's so recent, and yet he has this certain mythical nature about him that some may argue outshines or overstates his greatness as a pitcher, as great as he was. And again, I'm not putting anyone down. Everyone we're talking about is like the best of the best. So we have to really split hairs here a bit. So, Ryan, he won a World Series, although he pitched only a couple innings in that series. Over 200 complete games. An immense talent. I forgot that I have to pick somebody at the end of this rant as I'm talking. I'm going to go with Satchel Paige. I think peak Satchel is hard to imagine the level of the greatness. Nolan Ryan was amazing. But I give an edge to Paige, and I'd prefer not to, like, in a court setting under oath, have to fully explain why, but it's where I'm going.
Yeah, this is a really difficult one. I think Ryan benefits from recency bias here somewhat, from the standpoint that he's still around. He pitched until the 1990s. 1993 was his final year. He kind of like has become this Mr. Texas cultural figure, in part because he pitched for both the Astros and Rangers, and also went into the Hall of Fame with that big Texas Ranger T on his cap, which I think matters. I know Dave might not care as much, but nonetheless, he's become like Mr. Texas. Texans love him in this like gritty, fight guys, beat up Robin Ventura when he's 46 and Ventura's 25 kind of thing. He really has just come to like embody Texas in a lot of ways, and for that reason he's defended to the end of time. I think that I might get some hate for this, but frankly, he is a bit overrated as a player. He was fantastic. Again, like we're talking about the best of the best here. And his strikeout record's not getting broken. 5,714. But that being said, I mean, in part because the dude played 27 seasons over 28 years as a power pitcher. I mean, he's like a physical alien. So that being said, I mean, Ryan's exceptional. And really has this like mythical defending behind him because of his like embodiment as Mr. Texas. But I do think Paige is probably more of a culturally significant player. Reorienting this back to, if we have a Hall of Fame for U.S. team sports, and who am I going to put in? I then, with that thought in mind, lean more Paige. I do think Ryan had a better career, in part because Paige, again, we don't really have the full statistical resume and so on. But I think I'm going to go Paige as well. Paige, like you said, he was the number one pitcher in the Negro Leagues. He was one of the very early players to move into AL, NL baseball once integration happened. And he even pitched, in 1965, a 3-inning, or it was a 1-inning or 3-inning outing for the Kansas City Athletics when he was 58 years old, and they brought him a rocking chair for the dugout, and he pitched shutout. No one scored off him. Actually, funny enough, Kirk, if you can find a way to ever get Carl Yastrzemski on the podcast, ask him about that, because he was on the opposing team that day.
I would love to.
Yeah, talking about how you had Pete Rose. So
yeah, that was before I was even doing podcasts. So like that was, I was in Vegas. I just went up to him and asked.
Oh, that's sweet. But yeah, like
so
there is somebody around who could tell you what it was like to face Satchel Paige, albeit a very elderly version of Satchel Paige.
Yeah,
Go on.
and I would just add, it's interesting because they both pitched forever. Page pitched in the American League at age 46, and he threw 117 innings to the tune of a 3.53 ERA, which is a 119 ERA plus that he had, and that's at 46. But also, not only did he have a lot of play that you can see on a baseball reference, there's so much more between Winter League ball and barnstorming. And another just fact on the cultural piece, I think, is although he didn't integrate baseball, his existence and greatness and fame absolutely helps move forward the progress that leads to Jackie Robinson. Satchel Paige almost certainly was the first really big, famous black baseball player in America in a really wide-ranging sense. Again, Josh Gibson just didn't have that level of fame. Satchel Paige was a big name, a big draw. Didn't matter your race or anything. You would go see him pitch.
Yeah, I
guess we agree.
didn't want to pair those two together. Like you were mentioning earlier, like I didn't know who to put Babe Ruth up against. So I thought I'd just throw something at a wall, see if it would stick.
Like one last bit is that as we talk about this, there just absolutely has to be representation from the Negro Leagues and in a U.S. Sports Hall of Fame.
I'm hoping it's going to happen.
There has to be. It is too significant an entity for there not to be meaningful representation. And I mean, yes, like Jackie Robinson played 1 year there. Willie Mays played a handful of games for the Birmingham Barons in 1948. But Satchel Paige played almost his entire career in the Negro Leagues. And for that reason, he's a much more fitting representative for the league as a whole. So just to follow that kind of strain of logic as well, that I think that there absolutely has to be somebody from the Negro Leagues represented in this Hall of Fame. Paige is the clear name to do so.
And I'll just add, now I got to add a note to that, which is just, I don't know the other elements of the hall when it comes to the executive piece, but really, if I'm now thinking in terms of there's one Negro League figure, it's got to be Rube Foster, who was an absolutely
Rube is a nominee.
Yeah, so he's somebody who on that executive card or however that would work. That's a talk for another day, but a Hall of Fame level player, executive, started leagues. It's hard to overstate his impact, and he's one of the most absolutely Effa Manley would be up there. Rube Foster's probably the most underappreciated baseball figure in the history of the game.
Yeah, because again, just a bit of self-promotion, because there are coaches and contributors. So like we have sections for that. I'm calling an audible here. I've got 3 more left to go. I had 2 pairings. I've now decided to mix them up, actually. We're going to go with Ted Williams was originally against somebody else. He's now against Stan Musial.
Oh, I didn't know. Was Musial on the list? I didn't know ahead of time. But anyway, Musial is Julian's wheelhouse. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So you've got 2 of the greatest players ever here again.
Mm-hmm.
They're contemporaneous. I mean, Williams played from 39 to 60, Musial from 41 to 63. Almost exact overlap with one another. Williams was, during his career, the best player in the American League, especially in the 1940s, despite missing 3 years to war. 5, really, including 2 to Korea. But talking about the 40s specifically, Musial missed 1 year to war. He was more fortunate from that standpoint. But he was also the preeminent National League player of the 1940s, winning 3 MVPs and 3 championships in the decade. Okay, so that being said, I mean, these 2 players are also 2 players I have in my top 10 players all time. Musial, this is a similar kind of point to what I made about Wagner Gehrig, that Gehrig was better on a per game basis, but Wagner has more volume to offset that. Musial has considerably more volume than Ted Williams, although Ted was better on a per game basis. Ted is the all-time on-base percentage leader at .482, which is just obscene. I mean, the guy hit .388 when he was 38 years old. You know, I mean, Mickey Mantle hit .365 that year and did not win the batting title. because Ted hit almost 400 when he was almost 40. So this is a really fitting pairing, and these two players are so culturally significant and so important. I do think culturally, though, Ted probably does outweigh Stan a little bit. There is that really famous photo from like 1999 or 2000 of Ted Williams at what looks like, I think it's the All-Star game, and
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
like
yeah.
a just swarm of greats around him, just completely treating him like a god. And as incredible as Stan is, I don't remember that exact moment ever happening. Just to give you a kind of representation of, it seems like how he's kind of lauded in as this mythical figure. Stan felt almost more like a real world human being than Ted did. He was much more accessible as a person. He signed millions of autographs. He was always good to have a conversation with somebody. Ted was a bit more aloof and kind of just feels more like a legend. Also the 406, last player hit 400 in 1941 has to be mentioned. I'm very inclined to say Stan just because of how big a Cardinals fan I am, and the fact that he did win those 3 championships to Ted 0, and in 1946 he and the Cardinals stopped Ted from winning. Stan beat him in the World Series. But I think that this is an instance where Ted Williams's career, like his cultural impact, makes the scale tip in his favor slightly.
Yeah, I'm going to go with Ted Williams, and it pains me in the sense of, because again, I think it's one of those cases where Musial is really not appreciated as much as he deserves to be. But Julian explained it all very well. On a per game basis, I think Williams has a bit of a clear edge. And then just my personal code of what I'm going to account for, that sort of lack of being able to play in the leagues because of a racial prejudice is something that I account for. This guy was fighting in 2 wars, then truly fighting, not to put down anyone else's service, but and the idea that like he could miss 3 seasons and then just immediately return and hit 342, and just it is honestly amazing, his totals regardless of all the time he missed. And he's very well considered as the greatest hitter in baseball. I may have put down hits as a record when it came to Rose. Williams is such a different level of hitter in every way, and the game is hitting and pitching largely. Again, I love Stan Musial, but I got to go with Ted Williams.
Okay. So this is now the new pairing. Actually, I'm glad I did that then. So Yankee icon versus Yankee icon, DiMaggio versus Mantle.
So yeah, I would also, by the way, I'd add Ted Williams was like a very renowned fly fisherman. I don't know how much that gets included in
as much as you want it to be.
Yeah, I have no idea how to quantify that, but it's certainly my grandfather was a big time fly fisherman person,
which is the second time this week I've had, because Evan, my partner on the other one, he just told me the same thing.
Yeah, Ted Williams is in the National Fishing Hall of Fame as well.
I just learned that because he told me that. I had no idea.
And not that I'm a deep expert on fishing, but at the same time, just fly fishing is a whole different level of skill than going out to the old watering hole and dropping a line.
It will matter to you if you say it matters to you. That's the great thing about this democratic process. This is pure democracy in action, kids.
Let me say one more thing for Stan. This is just a little anecdote that some people may not know. Stan Musial is the first, I believe, the first athlete in sports history, or at least American sports history, to have had a statue erected outside of his stadium for him. The Cardinal statue, it's actually pretty funky looking because the arms are like too long and it's not well balanced a statue, but it's still standing outside Busch Stadium. It's actually a thing in St. Louis to say like meet at the Musial, and people know it's that statue that you're referring to.
Okay.
Yes. So the entire kind of thing of creating statues to honor franchise greats and how that's kind of taken on across sports and US team sports, I'm fairly certain that Musial was the very first one to have that done for him.
Interesting. Okay.
So okay, DiMaggio Mantle. I was wondering if that one would happen. Joe DiMaggio.
It was only going to happen as of 10 minutes ago.
Really? I thought that was
Yeah,
going to
no,
be one
because
of your...
I had Williams versus DiMaggio and then Mansell versus Musial. And then I just decided I called an audible last minute to change it up.
So DiMaggio also missed 3 seasons, whole seasons to military service. DiMaggio played in 13 seasons. He was an all-star in 13 seasons. I'm not sure there's anyone who really matches that. But 3-time MVP, 2 batting titles, 9 World Series. He was a very good defender. In a way, I think that gets lost, but there's a lot of the boomer types who maybe overstate the level of greatness, but still very, very good defender. He's 7th in center field JAWS, which again is a bit deflated as a result of military service and really would have been like prime years. He's got the famous 56 game hit streak. Yeah, he was certainly a gigantic pop icon, famously wed to Marilyn Monroe. Mantle, a lot of similarities in terms of level of fame because we're talking Yankees here. Another 3-time MVP, won a Triple Crown. He's got 536 home runs, 298 batting average, which he in later years would say, if I knew 300 mattered so much to everybody, I just would have, made sure to make that happen. I feel like his glove might be a little overrated the way people talk about him. It might shock people to think any Yankees could be overrated, but again, his injuries ended his career a bit early in his mid-30s. I think, in a way, an interesting difference between them would be really the introduction of television. DiMaggio's career really precedes the real spread of TVs being in nearly every home, whereas Mantle was able to gain a level of fame probably as a result of that. He also just had a certain smile and a Hollywood vibe that maybe DiMaggio maybe didn't, I don't know. But DiMaggio did marry Marilyn Monroe. But back to baseball, it's hard. This is a really tough one. I'm so inclined to go Mantle, but I do wonder in a way, and this is why I brought up television, if it's really a difference in the cultural landscape as a result of that very powerful device entering every home that makes the difference. Again, this is one where, I wouldn't want to have to give a super detailed explanation for why, but I think I'm going Mickey Mantle.
Yeah, so to quote Simon and Garfunkel, Jolton Joe has left and gone away, and I'm gonna have to send him away again. I have to agree on this one. It's gotta be Mantle. Frankly put, Mantle was the superior player. The quality of his career just outweighs the quality of Joe DiMaggio's. I have him ranked ahead all time, and I think that most people probably would. The advanced analytics also bear that out. I think DiMaggio has around 80 career WAR, 79 point something. Mantle's is about 111, so substantially higher. Mantle, also, I guess this kind of fits slightly more into the recency bias idea. He's a little bit more recent. Like Dave mentioned, TV was around, so we have more footage of him. He kind of has this like mythical aura as the most popular and famous figure in baseball at the height of its popularity as kind of the predominant sport in the golden era of the game, which was, the 50s really to the early 60s. And in that time period, Mantle was the guy, not necessarily the best player, Willie Mays, but the guy. He was the face of the game in a lot of ways. And, if you really just need a representation of how still famous Mickey Mantle is, we talked about the Honus Wagner baseball card earlier. Well, it's actually not the most expensive baseball card or trading card in general. That's actually the 1952 Topps Mickey Mantle, picturing a young Mick with a blue background holding the bat over his shoulder. And in 2022, I believe it was, an SGC 9.5 sold at auction for 12.6 million. There are, however, 3 higher graded PSA 10 copies, the best of which typically is considered to be a copy owned by Marshall Fogel. And that card has never gone to public auction, but it's speculated that would sell as high as 50 million. It is the crown jewel of the sports collecting world in a sense. So that's not really so prevalent to this discussion of, who are we putting in the Sports Hall of Fame, but it does kind of give a little representation of the fact that Mantle is just such an important, famous, loved figure, and he still maintains relevance to a degree through something else, again, like a baseball card. I even had friends of mine who don't collect sports cards message me, knowing that I do, after that sale went through, just because they were astounded by it. So, quality of the player, Mantle, kind of cultural significance as it persists to the modern time period, Mantle. It has to be Mantle.
I thought that was actually going to go the other way, but I guess that's the pop culture junkie in me. As we're recording this, it's October 2nd. I don't know when this is going to go up. Hopefully, a couple weeks after. It was this is the day after watching Sunday Night Football, with the second one with Travis Kelce and Taylor Swift, which is nothing compared to what Joe DiMaggio and Marilyn Monroe were. But anywho, we've got one final one, and it's not a pairing. There's 3. You're gonna take one out, and so you mentioned Willie Mays. He's up against Hank Aaron and Barry Bonds. All 3 very connected, and you're taking one out.
I'm gonna let Dave go first, but I'm just gonna say
That's okay. You can go first.
No, you can. Barry Bonds, I'm blasting him into the sun on this one.
Right?
He's a billion miles behind the other 2 for me.
So yeah, if it's so I wouldn't say that personally, but if the idea is we're taking one out, then yeah, I got to take out Bonds, I guess. I mean,
okay, then that was pretty simple. Let's just take Bonds out of the equation. And
I don't really love that, by the way. I don't love doing it maybe as much as Julian, but because Barry Bonds was amazing.
You know what?
But,
okay,
but I am taking him out. If I have to pick one, I'm taking him out.
Let me clarify. Bonds was incredible.
One more level here then. Now we're going Hank Aaron, Willie Mays.
Okay.
I did not see that one coming.
I'm pretty sure they're 1-2 in like all-star seasons ever, with Aaron with 21 and Mays with 20. Which shows
Musial 22.
Is that seasons?
Musial has 20 as well.
Oh, okay. Oh, 20 TOO.
Yeah, he's tied with Mays
too. But yeah.
So look, Hank Aaron broke Babe Ruth's record. I mean, but even before you get to that, because I think that in a way overshadows Aaron's greatness, because everyone looks at that and knows that. He had the home run record. He leads, I believe, still in RBI and total bases. He won batting titles. He won MVP. He never had I think he never hit 50. Was it never hit 40 in a year? Either way, he just was very
Aaron never hit 50.
Never hit 50, because it'd be hard to pile up those numbers without 40. But I think Aaron, just a consummate gentleman who faced incredible pressure as he broke Babe Ruth's Ruth's record. As much as we want to talk about hits or anything else, home runs are kind of the thing, the action in baseball that is the most beloved, revered, to the point where we remove people from consideration in a way from the Hall of Fame because they hit too many of them, because in part because of drugs they took. If people took drugs but it impacted their game in most other ways, people don't even seem to even imagine that or think about that. It's kind of just, these guys got strong, they hit home runs, they broke a record I care about. That upsets me. Which the idea that almost removes people from, nullifies their career, shows you how important home runs are. And Aaron had that record, 3,700 hits. He got nearly 98% of the vote when he was a Hall of Fame candidate, which of course is too low. But when you look at the history of the Hall of Fame and you consider what people got, that's an extremely high number. Even when
What
we
did Mays get, Dave?
I don't remember offhand. What is it?
It's around 94%.
Right. And all right, that might sound not that far off, but in a way, that's a big difference. And obviously, that's egregious. I think they've both won the Presidential Medal of Freedom. I know Aaron did. I think Mays got it then, which shows again their sort of standing in the cultural landscape. Willie Mays, 2 MVPs, 12 Gold Gloves. I mean, if Jackie Robinson broke the color barrier, and when he did, he brought a certain element of Negro League play for the first time to ALNL ball, which I feel like if you had to sum it up in one thing, him drifting off third base and stealing home. But Mays, in a way, then ups that between both his play as a center fielder, just his manner in the batter's box, him on the base paths. He ended up with 660 home runs. He's considered by some the greatest baseball player ever. So all told, I'm going to go with Willie Mays because he's one of the couple of best baseball players ever. And again, it's a shame because I guess in certain ways they're both underrated in a way, but Aaron, I think it's more underrated than Mays even in a way because of the lack of maybe flash. But Willie Mays was a total absolute monster for a long time. And yeah, I'm going Mays.
Yeah, so I want to clarify one thing before that. When I said blast Bonds into the sun, Bonds was an incredible player, top 10 player all time. I more so meant just cultural impact. Bonds has too much controversy around him to really.
We're not meaning literally. We're not going to contact Elon.
Not literally.
Yeah.
But yeah, so Mays and Aaron, this is a really difficult one because these two guys are, I mean, as evenly stacked as it comes in a lot of ways. Again, just another representation of better on a per game basis, Mays, more volume, Aaron, although Mays has tons of volume too. He's one of 4 players with 6,000 total bases. The others being Musial and Pujols. Go Cardinals. So let's recognize that these guys are the elite of the elite. I think I have them at numbers 5 and 6 all time, which sounds egregious to some people, but a debate to have for another day. This is a really difficult one because, like Dave has mentioned, I love volume, and volume says Aaron versus over almost anybody else in baseball history. I think that, interestingly enough, Aaron has actually, or at least for quite a while, was a more significant name. And I think this was through the 70s to the 80s, and it's because of the home run chase and passing Babe Ruth and becoming the all-time home run leader and kind of the importance of that singular feat and how that is also represented in, the Hall of Fame voting, which he was voted in by a higher percentage of voters than Willie Mays. And that was only 3 years apart. So same era. That being said, interestingly enough, I think this is actually this brings up a really interesting point. And I think that nowadays Willie Mays has become a more significant name. And the reason I think for that is because of the rise of sabermetrics and how they have caused a kind of reorienting towards looking at players' careers from the past and revaluing them and their accomplishments. And once you go through the lens of sabermetrics, Mays just comes out on top and frankly comes out as potentially the greatest player ever, given that he's modern and it's more easy to contextualize his accomplishments while it's harder to contextualize the accomplishments of somebody like Babe Ruth who played 100 years ago. Mays, however, is still with us today. So, for example, I have to do my obligatory Mike Trout thing here. So people adore Mike Trout, and he's an incredible player and was the best player of the last decade. And a large part of that is represented in the fact that he has fantastic sabermetrics. Mike Trout has had a 9-WAR season, I believe 4 times. Let me check to make sure. and I'm not rounding here, at minimum 9, so not 8.8, at minimum 9, Mike Trout has had a 9-WAR season 4 times, twice topping 10. Willie Mays had a 9-WAR season 9 times, 6 times topping 10. To the context that means is Willie, as incredible as people picture Mike Trout to be, everything he has done and his valuations are just completely eclipsed by Willie Mays. So for the modern baseball fan who looks at Trout as a deity-like figure, Mays takes that to a whole new level in a lot of ways. And that's also in large part because of the volume, right? But point being, I think that you would go Hank Aaron maybe 30 years ago, but nowadays it's probably Willie Mays. And that's going to be my vote as well.
Okay. Two more things. So one, I just you gave me a flashback since we were talking about books. I think one of the first books I remember getting would have been probably 82 or 83, because again, I'm old. And my dad got me, it was a book about thank you, Jasper. The top 100 baseball players, according to this one guy. I don't know, but it was Willie Mays for what it's worth. I remember it was Mays, Ruth, Aaron. I can't remember anything else after that. Don't ask me what it's called. It's just the top 100 players back when there were books, kids. Imagine it's the internet on paper. The other thing that I'm going to throw off, I wasn't going to ask this, but I wasn't even thinking of this, but Julian, you inspired me on this one because you mentioned Bob Feller. Many of these players that we talked about are going to get into the first class. I don't know how many, but quite a few of them are. I'm going to ask each of you to give me 5 players who you would sort of take as substitutes. Obviously, they've got to be American, and they have to be at least 50.
Substitutes, does that mean I also have to pick the people I'm taking out? Because that's just a little complicated.
No. Just let's assume that 5 new people are going to take their spots.
Okay. I mean, I forget, we talked about a couple people when Julian and I met. For one thing, I would think Roger Clemens has to be on this. I mean, no matter what anyone wants to think of him for the similar reasons as Bonds, 7 Cy Youngs is an absurd, it is just an absolute ridiculous thing. So he certainly makes it. Mathewson, maybe, but maybe not. I don't know if there's enough of a bit of like a cultural feel there, but it was a first Hall of Fame class kind of guy and just one of the great, but I don't know. I gotta think. I'm trying to figure it out offhand.
I put you on the spot.
Clemens would be one, but Julian, why don't you throw one out if you got one?
I kind of got expired when you mentioned Bob Feller. So
Feller's a good one. I agree on Clemens.
Griffey is one.
Ken Griffey Jr.
Is he 50 though?
He's got to be, right?
Years old?
Yeah, he's 53.
He's 53.
Yeah.
All right, so then he could be one.
Griffey, so he was the face of baseball in the 1990s. I mean, maybe he's not quite as good as some of these other players. I have him as a similar ranking as like a Roberto Clemente, certainly not as big a humanitarian, but culturally so significant with the backwards hat and the sweet swing, and every kid in the 1990s growing up absolutely adoring him. Another name that I want to throw out is Derek Jeter. As you know, no, but we can fudge it.
No, I can't.
Okay, fine. We can't fudge it yet, but I'm going to mention Derek Jeter then for the future.
Yes,
just because
absolutely.
He's so popular and so beloved and won 5 championships. And even though he's now like been reconsidered as the worst defender to ever touch a baseball, and like every time he touched a ball, it was an error or something, according to what some people may think on Twitter. Derek Jeter is a future name that has to be considered. Now, there is another question that I have.
Sure.
You said that they have to be American. However, Roberto Clemente is not American. So
Puerto Rican. Puerto Rico is
Puerto
American.
Rican. Okay. So that counts for this. So it has to be interesting. Okay. So
like Pedro doesn't count.
Yeah. If you played in the United States for a full career.
That's a good question. What we're considering doing for future years, right, is players, and again, from other things, who had a cultural impact. So like, and again, I'm Canadian, believe it or not. I've done this whole United States Athletic Hall of Fame. Figure that one out, kids. I don't know. But Wayne Gretzky, for example, helped bring hockey more to the masses in the United States. So Wayne Gretzky, even though the peak of his career was in Edmonton, was very important in growing the game in the United States. Pele is another one that comes to mind in soccer because he played in his not peak years for the New York Cosmos, but does in the future like a Shohei Ohtani qualify? And that's sort of the beautiful thing. Like two people who like you don't necessarily have to be American born because on the list or a candidate, my favorite tennis player of all time is Martina Navratilova, but she's an American citizen but born in the former Czechoslovakia.
So
So
I can give you some names.
yeah,
I would go Clemens,
Mhm.
Griffey, Oscar Charleston, who was,
Yeah.
the shorthand thing would be Mays before Mays,
Mhm.
Frank Robinson.
Mhm.
And then, I kind of want to go I wanted to kind of go Pedro, but if that's debatable, maybe Randy Johnson then. And I think I feel pretty good about
Yeah.
those names.
And let me throw out another name, which depending on who you ask, he might be 50. Albert Pujols, which he just hit his 700th home run last year. He's top
Yeah.
5 in almost every counting batting statistic, 3 MVPs, 2 championships.
He might have been 50 10 years ago. We don't know.
Yeah, I mean, gosh, you've seen high school pictures of Albert. That's a full-grown man there. Actually, his senior stats are some of my favorite things ever because I think that he walked like 60% of the time because other high school coaches just refused to let him get pitches. He only hit like 8 home runs his senior year of high school because he just saw like 8 pitches.
And it's sort of the beautiful thing about this whole thing. Again, all democratic, all based on whatever your interpretation is.
Yeah.
Probably 12 years from now, Megan Rapinoe is going to be on the ballot, and you either love her or you hate her.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think there's a whole lot of in between with her.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, that's another one where it depends on how we're looking at the barrier between American, played in the US, not born, so on. But yeah, I'm gonna co-sign a few of those names that Dave brought up. Definitely Griffey, Clemens. I'm good with including Oscar Charleston as a third one. That was one that also came to mind for me, just as another nod to the Negro Leagues, and he being probably the number 3 guy behind Gibson and Page.
Mhm.
Frank Robinson being a fourth. He also was the first black manager in Major League Baseball history. I mean, AL/NL history rather, which is obviously very significant for another reason. And was that 4? So who are we going to say is the 5th?
I had
Let's come up with
Randy.
a fifth.
If I can't do Pedro, not that I would definitely take Pedro over Randy, but
Randy's definitely a good name to throw out there. I'm thinking of catchers. We've been talking about this a lot, like catchers being undervalued and throwing out either Bench or Berra. Berra does have the most championships of any player ever. He kind of has like the Bill Russell thing for Major League Baseball with 10. Bench is often considered to be the greatest catcher, though.
yeah, it's tough because my Phillies fandom. I want to put Michael Jack Schmidt into the conversation, but I feel pretty good about those names: Clemens, Griffey, Charleston, Frank Robinson,
Steve Carlton.
I like lefty, but
I have some personal he was a Philly. Unfortunately, a lot of great Phillies over the history have some prickly things that they've said or done. But yeah, I mean, Steve Carlton's great, but I think I can name a few people before I'd go with lefty.
So no Tug McGraw. All right. With that, thank you both very much for doing this. If you can, just again, where can we find you at Twitter?
At Cooperstown Dave.
At _birds on the bat.
There you go. So with that, if you haven't already been inspired, you better be. www.nothalloffame.com/USA. Perhaps my guests here have helped you decide who you want to vote for. And again, whatever vote you're doing, we think it's right. Your motivation is correct. There is no wrong way to do it. 17 different sports are represented on this ballot. We've got baseball players, football, obviously, basketball, hockey, soccer, figure
Tennis,
skating,
golf.
tennis, golf. We've got a bowler, an Earl Anthony, greatest bowler of
Mookie
all
Betts.
time. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Future bowler Mookie Betts. I really wonder if Mookie Betts could end up like after he retires from baseball, maybe he'll like really legit go pro bowling. But he's got a few 300 games in his pocket. His baseball reference page, I believe, has like a funny little section.
I did not know that. I thought this was in reference to something he did on the field that was just going over my head.
No, literal bowling.
Okay.
He's a exemplary bowler.
What else we got? Speed skating with Eric Heiden and Bonnie Blair. Just off the top of my head here. There's boxing, of course. Dan Gable in amateur wrestling. 2 triathletes. Lots of people in track and field. So everything we've got pretty much. Synchronized swimmer and Tracy Ruiz. So we think I'd like to think we've done a pretty good job in putting this together. Wasn't just me. It wasn't just my partner Evan. We've got 2 Olympians who were part of this group. Chris Huffins, bronze medalist decathlete, and Dan Steele, bronze medalist in the bobsled, who was part of that group, and former NFL player Richmond Webb, 7-time Pro Bowler not Pro Bowler. Yeah, he was. No, sorry. 7-time Pro Bowler with the Miami Dolphins and member of the Miami Dolphins Ring of Honor. So it's not just me coming up with a bunch of names and throwing some stuff at a wall, seeing if it's going to stick. I'd like to think that I put together a pretty decent group of some vets, and also our good friend, or your good friend, Vinny Lospinuso, who is, if it's all about Hall of Fames, he's the guy to go to. So thank you so much. If you like what you're seeing here, there's a lot of other shows here in the Buchnerverse, because I call it a Buchnerverse because that's where I get a little bit pompous. So be it. The Classic Sports Review with Glenn Pulowski, the Buffalo's Greatest Triathlete. Look for a bunch of shows with that. The Hall of Fame show with Evan Nolan, the show where Vinny makes Hall of Fame cases for various people, and the Retro Football Review with Paul Lawrence. And if you don't want to look at sports, I've also got the show where I look at crappy songs that were hits, where I go, how the hell was this a hit? I just did Mr. Roboto. You remember that one, guys? No? Okay.
Yeah.
I am very old. I'm showing that here, with my co-panelists. But with that, wherever you are, wherever you may be, make it a great day, because it ain't going to come again. Thanks, everyone.